Jesse. I represent Table F, which is also indicative of my grade in grade 9 French. Okay, so for question 1, which was what was the experience, what impact did it have? Big one was managing recreation, managing your time outside. How you could kind of get away from the fires was a bit of a problem for people because usually they could just drive to another city, which they couldn't because it was coming at them from all directions. Managing livestock and pets was a big problem. Also managing the mental and emotional effect, say even having SAD kind of had an effect on some people this summer with the smoke enveloping. Issues with theft, especially in the communities as well, was is my stuff going to get taken if I'm evacuated? That was a big one. Adjusting travel plans, guilt from inaction. So say if someone was, wanting to volunteer but they didn't, they kind of went, there's more I could have done. The magnitude of the smoke had a huge effect. Impressions of how many people volunteered. I think it was really heartening for the whole community to know how many people jumped in and helped. There were, however, problems with allocation of volunteers for certain organizations. Some had too many, and some had too little. There were also issues being placed into volunteer work based on skill. If you have a certain skill set, where are you going to go? There were issues with the RCMP and CVSE for, transporting goods, hay bales, a bunch of other things that were getting confiscated and kind of taken away at roadblocks that was causing frustration with people. Dealing with the aftermath, I think, was a big one for a lot of people too. Dealing with damages, dealing with fire retardant dropped on your house, dealing with, losing power and losing goods, and, if you have a business dependent on stuff that, will spoil, how do you deal with it? And dealing with the extremes of flooding to fires immediately because some people had to deal with, boarding up their houses and creating dams, and then all of a sudden immediately shifting over to fire prevention. There was an effect on tourism. There was effect of living in fear and anxiety and losing sleep because you didn't know if you were going to wake up to a fire. Dealing with those indirectly or directly causing fires, I think that was an effect on some of us where we saw, butts being flicked out of vehicles and stuff going off-road when it shouldn't have. But also a sense of pride for community and the citizens, and inside of it, I think, was what we had our biggest takeaway. For question 2, which was, what do you believe were the causes and what caused the impact to be more significant? The lush conditions, the flooding, followed by immediate heat and dry conditions, just causing all of that to start becoming fuel. Pre-burning, knowing when and where to burn, I think, was a big concern for a lot of people. Fire suppression, that created a plethora of fuel on the forest floor. Maybe we're doing too good of a job with that. Maybe we're putting out fires when we shouldn't. There was a lack of balance, I think, in that. Lightning, lack of awareness, campfires and littering all caused those. The impact, maybe there was a lot of Facebook communication. Maybe that was paramount, but what else were we doing? How were we reaching people who were maybe a little bit more isolated and weren't on Facebook? Not following consultation recommendations, which we had heard about, and more timely response to breakouts would have been, I think more of an impact. And also an allocation of funding and resources to the BC Wildfire Services. That was one that I think we all kind of noticed was a cause. Okay, so for question 3, state of emergency. So the things that we could do differently. State of emergency being addressed in a more timely fashion, not happening 2 weeks away, but happening immediately, I think would be a big one. Preparedness for conditions that are significant and keeping teams on standby, keeping wildfire teams on standby for when we need to get going. No-go zones for non-related activity to forestry and business. Prescribed burning for crown, private, or reserve land, maybe understanding what the confines of those things are. Upkeep and maintenance of high-risk areas. Managing how far someone can build, maybe into remote forest areas so we don't deal with civilization being at risk.
Okay, you got time, Jess.
Okay. And I think learning from traditional techniques from First Nations communities, if they have these generations of these techniques, would be also another one. So that's a wrap for me.